All right, so welcome everyone to the Short-Term Rental Advisory Committee meeting. Today is August 8th. Thank you so much everyone for joining. Really appreciate our council members who are able to join, and we have special guest Councilwoman Gilmore here to talk about residential rental. So we'll jump right in. Feel free to turn your camera on. I don't turn mine on because it's hard to keep track of the presentation and the speakers and the emails that are coming in and all that at the same time, but please feel free to turn your camera on if you'd like. But otherwise, we will jump into the slides. All right, so as usual, we reserve public comment for the end of the meeting. We've not received any written comments since the last meeting. If you are on Zoom, you can raise your hand and we'll call on you. Folks have 2 minutes to speak. And if you're unable to raise your hand on Zoom, you can email me. My email's at the bottom there. It's alex.vidal@denvergov.org. As usual, we always start these meetings off with some data to see where we are with our short-term rental program. So the first slide is our licensure rate. So this is the percentage of short-term rentals in the community that are licensed. We've had a pretty high licensure rate pretty consistently. Around kind of earlier this year, we noticed that there was a lot of duplicates, a lot of hotel rooms that were coming up and showing up as unlicensed short-term rentals. And so our short-term rental team was able to go in there and remove those duplicates, remove hotels that were on there showing as short-term rentals. And so that's why that big jump here up to now we can celebrate. We're at over 90% licensure rate. So 90% of the advertisements that we're seeing on the internet for short-term rentals are licensed. And so very proud of that. It's been a great program, and we continue to hear from other cities that want to learn about our program and how it works so that they can adopt it. I'll share some of that in the current events slide as well. This is our application processing time. So we discussed before, it was high last summer. We were having some staffing issues, and now dropped down. The last one, now we're at 12 days is the average time it takes to process a short-term rental application. Not of all the data for the applications that were completed in July has come in yet, so that's why there's that big gap there. But the important number here is that 12 days on average to process a short-term rental application. And then applications completed. So this is the time it takes to complete an application. So 79%, almost 80% of new applications are processed within 30 days. And then 91% are processed within 60 days. And then there's a smaller percentage that are taking longer than that. We are trying to clear this backlog. These are generally folks that are in the process of being denied. The denial process takes a little bit longer. We want to make sure that their rights are respected, and that everything is done, every I is dotted, every T is crossed, and so it takes some time, but we are trying to clear that backlog so that there aren't any applications that are longer than that amount of time. For renewal applications, very similar story. Again, 71% under 30 days and 91% under 60 days. And then once the application is processed, where do these end up? What's the final disposition? So in the last year, the last 12 months, as of the 7th, yesterday, we've issued 2,640 licenses. So that's new and renewals combined. We've denied 113, so that's about 4% of our applications. 100 have been withdrawn by the applicant, and then 169 have essentially been abandoned. That's what administratively closed means. They either didn't follow up or didn't complete their application within a year. And so you'll notice that that's a higher percentage than the ones that are denied. And then we've added this new category, which is why before we were at 90% here for issued, and it's dropped down a bit, that about 7% of applications are pending. We go over these slides. It's just to show that most of the questions that we receive are about the application, and they're not property complaints. These are just kind of general questions about the program. At the last meeting, the committee members asked that we look into this and see if we can find out what kinds of questions are being asked and whether we can address those kind of earlier on to avoid, calls to 311. And I was able to get that data It was about 7,000 lines on an Excel sheet. So it was too much for me to, unfortunately, it wasn't broken down into further categories that we could just kind of, group together and count. And I wasn't able to go through each one of those and count them up individually. And so I was able to kind of skim them and read as many as possible. And most of the questions are basically, I don't know how to upload this document. I don't know how to edit my application. I don't know how to, access this or that feature. And a lot of that information is already on the website. And it's really just a matter of pointing people to the right information. So I could see that it was resolved by 311 getting back to them, or somebody from our short-term rental team, and just, basically providing that information that they weren't able to find on their own. We do work really hard to make that information accessible, easy, clear. And so we're not quite sure how to reduce those questions. We are kind of looking at our process for responding to those kind of questions to see if we can find any areas to kind of speed things up or be more consistent. But overall, it just really seemed like basic kind of customer service type questions that will have to be resolved in that sort of, here's the web page you need to go to, or here's the link you need to click, or whatever it might be. Or for folks it's a lot of folks that maybe they don't have internet or are not familiar as much with technology and just need a little bit of extra help getting through the application. And then this is, basically the same data. It's just broken down month by month. Again, most of the questions we get are about the application. And then here's our revenue data. Really good news to report. We've been over $1 million now since February, every month since February. Short-term rentals represent about 11.3% of our larger tax revenue. We're at 8.15 million, which is close. It was close to the total for 2021. Obviously 2020 and 21 were less because of the pandemic and reduced travel, but overall really great numbers. I left June and July of last year on there just so you can kind of compare, but doing really well. And that's for the city overall receiving revenue from short-term rentals. We'll see it's a little bit of a different picture in our current events slide and what's happening with individual hosts. So just some stories to share here to get a sense of what's happening out there. This is an article about how data is making the short-term rental market more sophisticated. So with more data, they're able to kind of parse things out more finely. Now, this is like private sector data. This is not the public data that we collect, but on the private sector side, the market itself and the hosts are getting more sophisticated and kind of fine-tuning their approach based on this data that they're collecting, which is how they're able to get to some of these conclusions that we'll talk about in these other articles. So this next article, it talks about the saturation that it's been a theme we've been talking about in the last couple of meetings. There's just a lot of stock out there in the short-term rental market. So this is leading folks that bought, a second home or a vacation home, an investment property, and thought they could rely on short-term rental revenue to pay that mortgage, are finding that they're now having to sell those extra homes. And so, interesting article about what's happening with short-term rentals and folks that may have overextended themselves a bit, relying on revenue they thought they could make. But Colorado is among the places. Oh, sorry. This article is about revenue reduction. Now, this is not from the government perspective. This is from the host perspective. So there are hosts that are not seeing as much revenue as they had hoped to see. But as you can see from numbers overall, our revenue is not necessarily going down, although could be a leading or lagging indicator. Our numbers might be ahead or behind what's happening in the market, usually behind, but just something to keep in mind about the market, what's happening out there. So nationally, we look at what other cities are doing. We talked about how Dallas their planning commission had been talking about adopting short-term rental regulations. Their council has now banned short-term rentals in single-family zoned areas, and so that's a big new change there. Philadelphia, we've been tracking that. First, they had reached out and wanted to learn about primary residency, our program, and our licensing enforcement. Then we tracked a story about how they had adopted primary residency. Now we're tracking a story about how they're cracking down on unlicensed short-term rentals in Philadelphia. Interesting story from Whatcom County, Washington. So they've set a very high bar for short-term rentals that are near Whatcom Lake. And that includes a $4,000 permit that they must get, and also a public hearing that they have to go through. So very different from our program, but the reason for that is because the lake was beginning to have environmental impacts. And so they were very concerned about the lake and wanted to protect that natural resource. And so set this high bar for the short-term rentals near the lake. Locally here in Colorado, Douglas County has adopted a short-term rental license requirement. So they had a short-term regulations before, but now they have an actual license requirement. Jefferson County, their residents are starting to voice their concerns about short-term rentals, traditional issues like trash, noise, parking. They're very concerned about fire safety there and folks not being aware of the fire risk in the area. And then kind of interesting sort of mixed messages on revenue, but this article is about how Colorado is among the areas that has the highest potential revenue. So in other words, short-term rentals that have the potential to generate large amounts of revenue. But these tend to be places like Breckenridge. Breckenridge is in the top 4. Places like Yellowstone, Jackson Hole. Denver is on the list. It's sort of in the middle of the list, but it's an interesting list of places that have the highest potential for generating revenue for the host. And so now we'll jump into the residential rental program. At the last meeting, we heard that you guys wanted to learn more about the program and kind of how it intersects with short-term rentals. And so we wanted to bring you the Councilwoman Gilmore, who spearheaded this effort, and get her get some information about why this ordinance was developed, how it was developed, and what some of the goals are. So I'll click it over to that slide and then kick it over to Councilwoman Gilmore.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for the invitation. And it's always great to learn a little bit more about what's going on with short-term rentals as well. And so happy to be here. I started working on rental licensure way back in 2017. And honestly, prior to that time, then councilperson had been the lead on developing the short-term rental legislation for the city and county of Denver. And what really struck me was that we were making sure that in short-term rentals that there was safe entry and exit in and out of the structure. We were ensuring that there were fire extinguishers, that there were smoke detectors, that there were all of these safety measures for short-term rentals, rightly so, but we weren't requiring that in any of our longer term rentals in the city and county of Denver. And so really that was sort of the impetus of starting to look at licensure for multifamily apartment complexes, duplexes, and single family homes in the city and county of Denver. And around that same time, we had some pretty egregious violations, health and safety violations by property owners in the Green Valley Ranch community. And there was a single family home that was rented out to a refugee family who was in Denver, and they had put down $2,500 for the previous month's rent as deposit, and then $2,500 for the current month's rent. So they were $5,000 in, and they started to, share concerns that they had about that rental, and the media got involved. And it turns out that there was black mold growing in that single family home. There were exposed electrical wires. There was duct work that had been done that if the tenants, if it hadn't have been summer and it was winter and they would have turned on the heat, it wasn't vented properly. And so there would have been carbon monoxide issues with the property. And so started a really robust stakeholder process, and started in 2017. And after many, many meetings and the stakeholder process, after 4 years of work, we were able to pass unanimously through Denver City Council on May of 2021, the Healthy Residential Rentals for All, or what is now today called the Residential Rental Program in the city and county of Denver. And initially, it was sort of a hot potato. Agencies were unsure of if this should fall under community planning and development, or our housing division, but really, I think it settled in the exact right place, because it was going to be a license, and it is a license with excise and licensing. And so after we passed that legislation in May of 2021, I immediately, in partnership with the agency, convened rental license advisory group, because as you might imagine, there were folks who owned single family properties, older homes, that were concerned how they were going to bring those units into compliance. And so we really wanted to hear from folks what their concerns were. And that rental license advisory group advised the inspection checklist that we'll talk about a little bit later here with Nicole. We'll present on that. But it was super important for me as the bill author to stay very involved in the advisory group process. And I have continued to stay very involved in making sure that we expanded the number of housing inspectors that were trained to complete the inspections. And we always knew that that was going to be part of a workforce development, entrepreneur sort of portion of the bill, because we knew that we were going to need those inspectors, and it was a business workforce opportunity for us to reach out specifically to those in our city who might be qualified or might want to go through a training program and get trained up to meet the requirements to conduct the housing inspections. And so we framed this legislation after Chapter 27, which is our minimum housing standards in Denver. And so basically the minimum housing standards are, as you know, with short-term rentals, making sure that there's doors, that there's screens on the windows to keep pests out of the unit, that there's running water, that there's electricity, etc. Those basic needs for people to reside in a unit. And before the legislation, anybody could call and make a complaint, and Denver Department of Public Health and Environment would come out and inspect the unit, but it was all complaint based. And we knew that renters many times are hesitant to reach out about issues because they don't want to get evicted for those very issues. And so tied into the residential rental legislation, we also made the requirement that landlords would provide their renters with a copy of the fully executed and signed lease document. So renters had their full lease. And then if there is any rent demand made by a property owner of a tenant, the property owner is required by law to provide that tenant with their housing rights and resources. So that tenant can reach out to different nonprofits and city agencies to help them stay in their housing. And so I'm really proud of that provision as well. And it's exciting to see where this program has gone and where it's going. And I just want to publicly thank the excise and licensing staff for all of their hard work and partnership in getting this implemented and making sure that it's running really well. And so I'll go ahead and stop there. And I think Nicole's going to present the rest, but I will definitely stay around. And if there's any questions afterwards, happy to answer them. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Councilwoman Gilmore. I really appreciate you giving us that kind of history and background and kind of why for this. You can see the goals there as described by the Councilwoman. Now we're going to describe the program, kind of the ins and outs of that, and then also compare it to the short-term rental program. And then we'd like to kind of save questions until the end. But you guys are committee members, and so if you do have a question, feel free to speak up. But if you can hold the questions to the end, that'd be great. I also want to just let everybody know that Nicole unfortunately was out sick today, and so she won't be able to, I'll be presenting her slides for her, but should be the same information. Hopefully I'll do it justice. So the residential rental property, we'll start off with a definition. It's any building, structure, or accessory dwelling unit that is rented or offered for rent for 30 days or more at a time. As you all know, short-term rentals are covered under a different program. The main difference there is this is 30 days or more. Short-term rentals are 29 days essentially or less. We are estimating there's going to be about 54,000 properties in Denver that need to get this license. We've done this in partnership with the Denver Department of Public Health. So as Councilwoman mentioned, there's a complaint-based program that this is modeled on. So this is now a required licensing program. So we're being proactive rather than relying on tenants to make complaints. This now is a proactive license that the owner has to get. Some important dates. So at the beginning of 2022, is when we started this program. That all of last year was a voluntary period where anyone could get a license. We had the program up and running. We're making small tweaks as we went along and trying to make it as easy and clear as possible. But starting on January 1 of last year, all landlords now that rent to somebody for 30 days or more need to execute a written lease with that person and give them a copy. So that's important for their rights, so they understand the contract that they're entering into. And then they also need to share a copy of the rights and resources document that the city has put together to ensure that they understand their rights and what resources are available for them to stay in their housing. As of January 1 of this year now, all multi-unit properties need to be licensed. And so that's going to be like your apartment complexes, any place that has more than one unit for rent, basically. So now it's required as of this year. We spent all of last year in education. Now we're starting to do some enforcement, and we're really focused on properties that have not made an attempt to get a license or that have previous public health violations. And then beginning January 1 of next year, all single unit properties will need to be licensed. And so if like you own a single family home that you rent out the entire home to other folks, you'll need to get a license for that. And so again, we've really been focused on education, really trying to make people aware of the license, trying to help them through the licensing process. And so, if you have a multi-unit property and haven't gotten a license yet, please, take steps to do that. Look at it. We'll provide some resources for you. We're really trying to get people into the licensing fold and not and focus our enforcement efforts on those properties that have violations or that are, really not making any sort of effort. Information that we collect or that's needed, things that are relevant here. Inspections need to be done by a qualified inspector. These are private third-party inspectors. We'll get into their qualifications a little bit later. If it's a single unit property, you need a license for each single unit. If it's a multi-unit property, you can get one license for all of the units. So if you're an apartment complex, you can get your whole building covered under one license. If you have several buildings in the same complex, you can get the entire complex covered under one license. And you'll just need to note the addresses there if there's multiple addresses. And we're going to want to know the unit numbers as well to understand how many units are there and which ones were inspected. So as noted earlier, the inspections are by a third-party private inspector that are qualified. The inspector must inspect 10% of the units of the property. that 10% is selected randomly by the inspector, and all of the checklist items are checked for, verified by the inspector to make sure that they're compliant with the requirements. And so we do provide a guidebook, a checklist and a guidebook, and the guidebook really explains what each item on the checklist means. And so we recommend that property owners look through that guidebook to understand what it is that we're looking for, and try and resolve issues ahead of time, so that way they can just do one inspection and be done. The most common issues that are found, we've heard from inspectors, are basic things: the fire extinguisher, carbon monoxide detectors, smoke detectors. And so those are easy things to fix and to buy and install, to avoid having to do a reinspection. So to be qualified to do these, an inspector needs to be a certified home inspector and a certified building inspector. So as the councilwoman noted, this was a new kind of workforce, and so we worked a lot with folks in the community to try and get enough inspectors qualified to make sure that we had enough. And I believe we're over 40 now on that list. And so going from 0 to 40 in just a year or so, we view that as a success. And it's just a great opportunity for folks in the community that have one of these certifications and want to get the other. They want to start a business or work for a company that needs someone to do these inspections. It's a great opportunity. So actually conducting the inspections, the costs are set by the inspectors. Again, they're third-party private inspectors, and so we don't set the prices. The property owner and manager can use our list of inspectors, or they can ask the inspector if they're qualified to do these inspections, and double check that they have those. So as part of your application, you're going to want to get a copy of their certifications that you'll submit with your application. So that's how you'll know if they're qualified or not. And then their certification must be current, at least valid on the day that they did the inspection. So again, the inspection uses a checklist, very simple, very streamlined checklist. It just kind of notes whether something's in compliance or not in compliance. The guidebook is really the tool that's going to help explain, where do I need to put the smoke detector? Where does the fire extinguisher need to go? What does it mean to need an egress window in a basement unit? Things like that need to be explained more. Worked really hard on the guidebook to make sure that it's clear and easy to understand, and it should provide all the information you need to get through an inspection. And then, of course, properties still need to comply with existing codes, so the zoning, fire, and building codes. So re-inspections are when an item is on an initial inspection comes up as non-compliant. So some can be addressed during the inspection. So for example, smoke detectors and fire extinguishers, if they're in the wrong place, or you should pop out and buy one and come back and put it where it needs to go. Those can be addressed. They'll just be noted on the inspection form. For non-compliant items that need to be corrected, so you need to install an egress window, you need to fix some stairs or some lighting that's broken, some electrical issue, those will need to be re-inspected. And what you can do in that situation is submit your application within 90 days of that original inspection. That's important because we cannot accept an initial inspection that's more than 90 days old. It's obviously to prevent somebody from having an inspection and then having a year go by and then submitting an application. A lot could have happened in that year. So we want that initial inspection done within 90 days of when you apply. But then once you apply, if there are items that need to be corrected and re-inspected, you have a year from the date that you applied. So, if it takes several months to get a permit and, get a contractor to go out there and do what needs to get fixed, you have time to do that. But make sure that you submit that initial application, because if more than 90 days go by after that initial inspection, you'll have to do a whole new inspection. Resources that we provide. So we've got lots of information on the application page. We have a step-by-step video on how to get through the application. You can contact licenses@denvergov.org or 311. We have virtual and in-person appointments that are specifically for this program. So you'll often work directly with Nicole, who's the program manager, but you can always walk into our office as well and just ask for assistance in person. There are some exemptions. So for new construction, they're exempted from the initial inspection because they've just been built and just had an code inspection. So when you get a certificate of occupancy for a new building, that will accept that. And that's good for 4 years. If it's been longer than 4 years, you will need to get an inspection. For affordable housing properties, the fees are waived. And then also if the property gets an inspection by another government agency already, we will accept that report in lieu of another inspection. The license needs to be posted in the property. Again, it's valid for 4 years unless the ownership changes. Because the license is not transferable, the new owner will have to apply for a new license. And then if there's a change in ownership, that also requires a new license. And then any advertisement, similar to our short-term rental program, any advertisement for a long-term rental needs to include the license number on the actual advertisement. And that was modeled on our short-term rental program because it's been so helpful in making sure that we have a high licensure rate. So wanted to mimic that same success. To stay informed about what's happening, there's again the residential rental property information web pages. You can sign up for our bulletin. Sometimes we'll send out like reminders about a deadline that's coming up, or something that new information about the program that we wanted to share or just kind of reiterate. There was a couple of minor tweaks to the checklist early on in the program, so we shared those through the bulletin. So it's a really great resource if you have a rental property. We have a frequently asked questions page and other web pages that are related to the license itself. You can always contact the program manager, Nicole, and then you can always email our general inbox as well. All right, and so here we're going to compare the short-term rental and long-term rental programs, and I'll kick it over to Erica Rogers, our policy director.
Thanks, Alex. And I know we're throwing a lot of information at you all. I see some questions that have been submitted. We will get to those at the end. But I think this is kind of the piece where we talk about kind of, we know that the audience here are most likely currently licensed or attempting to get licensed for short-term rentals, and they may be wondering, how does the residential rental license tie into what I'm doing? How do I know if I need an additional license? Which license should I get? So hopefully this will cover some of that and help anyone who's curious about that figure it out. Next slide, Alex, please. So first we'll just kind of go through some of the comparisons. Alex and Nicole, who usually give this presentation, just went through a bunch of information. So sometimes it helps to see it side by side. So some of the basics about each license, right? Short-term rental are for periods of less than 30 consecutive days. They're offered for lodging accommodations within a dwelling unit. The residential rental is obviously for a longer period, it's 30 days or more, but it's also any building, structure, or accessory dwelling unit offered as a residence. So a little bit different of purposes. And you can see that based on just where the ordinances live in our Denver Revised Municipal Code. The short-term rental lives in the lodging chapter of the Denver Revised Municipal Code, and the residential rental property lives in the housing chapter. So as you all know, both require a license, but they do have different terms. That short-term rental license is valid for 1 year at a time, whereas the residential rental is on a longer time frame that only has to be renewed every 4 years. Now, neither of these licenses is transferable either to a different location or to a different person. So if if ownership changes, if you sell your home, whatever license you have will need to be surrendered, and the new owner of the home, if they would like to apply for one or both of the licenses, will have to submit those applications. Another basic tenet is about insurance. As you all know, short-term rentals require a minimum of $1 million in liability insurance. That can be offered either through your homeowner's insurance company or through a booking platform, regardless of which you have to notify your insurance company that you're utilizing your space as a short-term rental. There are no requirements like that for residential rentals in place. So those are some general requirements. These are requirements specifically related to the application, so how you apply for each license. The identification requirements are just slightly different. The short-term rental license requires specifically either a Colorado driver's license or ID card, and the residential rental license will take any form of ID that is our baseline accepted by the department. For short-term rentals, we do not require an inspection, and as Alex described, residential rentals do require that inspection upon application, though there are some limited exemptions. For example, if you are an affordable housing property that has received a more stringent inspection, you can substitute that as part of the process to streamline the application procedure. For short-term rentals, there's a requirement that if you are a member of an HOA and you're going to utilize the short-term rental, use your property as a short-term rental, you have to notify the HOA and you have to attest to that upon application. That's not required for the residential rental license. We can get into policy reasons if you're curious about any of these, but just as a side-by-side, that's something that's not required for residential rentals. Short-term rentals, as you all know, require primary residence proof. There are 2 documents out of a list that you can submit for short-term rental. That is also not required for residential rentals, although there are some possession requirements. So for short-term rentals, if you don't own the property, you do need to submit a signed possession of property certificate. But for residential rentals, you don't have to submit a certificate. You just have to attest as part of your application that you are in possession of the property when you are applying for it. One other thing that short-term rental applications require that residential rentals do not is a lodger's tax account number. And again, that gets to the basis of the licenses, where short-term rentals are a lodging license and the residential rentals are for someone's residence, not for lodging accommodations. This slide will talk about some compliance requirements and how they compare. As Alex mentioned, both short-term rentals and long-term residential rentals have to display the BFN, the license number, in all of their advertisements. When you go to a restaurant or another establishment, maybe liquor licensed or marijuana licensed, they all have to post their license in a place that the public can see. But with most of the advertisements for residential rentals and short-term rentals being online, this is a way that the public can know that the place that they're looking to stay is licensed. Short-term rentals don't have any requirements in ordinance or rule for appliances. However, residential rentals do have an ordinance requirement that the supplied appliances are safe and sanitary. I've linked the code section there so you can look at that. There's more information in the guidebook, like Alex mentioned. What does safe and sanitary mean? What will DDPHE be looking for if they come out? Those sorts of questions can all be found in that guidebook. Both licenses do require that the licensee provide certain documents for their guests. So for short-term rentals, you have to have that guest brochure that includes contact information for the host. If the host is going to be out of town, you have to designate a local responsible party, and then listing any relevant information that the guest might need to know about parking, noise, water, trash collection schedule, eviction routes, etc., anything that might be relevant to your particular rental. Residential rental licensees don't have to provide that type of brochure, but they do have to execute a lease with all of their long-term renters and provide them that copy of the Denver tenant rights and resources at the time the lease is signed. So a little bit different of what's required, but both licensees require the licensee to give their guests or their residents some sort of documentation. For record keeping, short-term rentals are required to keep past year records of the number of nights and the days that the short-term rental was rented by a guest. However, there are no record keeping requirements for the residential rental license. And then finally, both licenses do require safety equipment. I've linked the different code sections that are relevant for each license, but the short-term rentals have to have at least a smoke detector, carbon monoxide detector, and fire extinguisher. Residential rentals do as well, but they also have some additional housing code requirements that they have to meet. Those are all listed in relevant part in the RRP inspector checklist, as well as the guidebook. Finally, just a side-by-side of fees. Both of the licensees are meant to be pretty affordable and accessible. Both require a $50 application fee, although as Alex mentioned, because we're phasing in the residential rental license, there is a discount. You get 50% off your application fee if you apply before December 31st of 2023 for those single family property or single unit properties. So again, if you've got a single unit property and you're thinking of applying for a residential rental license, not only is it a requirement that you apply by January 1st, you also get a discount on the application fee. The licensing fees are flat for short-term rentals, but they're tiered for residential rentals. This is because the short-term rentals, you're only licensing one licensed premises, but with residential rentals, you may have, for example, a large apartment complex with over 250 units. So these fees apply to the different tiers and the different sizes of the property that you're going to want to license. There are no fee exemptions for short-term rentals. However, there are some that Alex talked about for the residential rentals. Those are mainly geared toward reducing costs for affordable and subsidized housing. So I've linked those for more information on those exemptions. So now we get to the fun part. We've just told you all kinds of information about all the different licenses. Councilwoman Gilmore came and she told you about the history and the public policy development of the license. And now I think we get to, in practice, what does this look like and what does this mean for hosts, right? You might be trying to figure out, okay, what type of license do I need? So to simplify it, we've put it into terms of 2 questions that you'll need to think about, with the caveat that, you should always talk to an attorney or a business consultant if you need legal or business advice or you have a pretty unique situation. That's not something the department can provide or the city can provide, but we do want to help you try to think about which license you might need in a pretty easy way. So the first question, next slide, please. The first question you'll want to ask is, what type of space are you renting to guests? So there's kind of 3 options here, right? You can be renting the space where you live. You all know this is your primary residence. And I'll give some examples along the way. Just know that I'm not going to name every single example that could work. If it's not listed here, it doesn't mean it's not allowed. It's just that I'm trying to help build a picture, paint a picture as we talk through some of these examples. So for example, my entire 1-bedroom apartment, or maybe a room in your 3-bedroom single family home that you're not using, that is a space where you live that you could rent out. You could also rent out a living space that is accessory to where you live. So that's known as an accessory dwelling unit or an ADU. As you all know, zoning has specific requirements for what is an official ADU versus what may be a space that is seemingly accessory, but doesn't necessarily meet the zoning code requirements for an ADU. We're not going to get into that today. That's a discussion that is for zoning, but just know that for purposes of this discussion, we're talking about ADUs. Those are ones that meet the ADU guidelines in the Denver zoning code and are considered truly an ADU by the zoning department. So this could be either an attached ADU or a detached ADU, so maybe a basement unit within your home, or a detached kind of granny flat, whatever you want to call it. There's a lot of terms colloquially that they're known by. And then the third option is some other living space, right? So it's either it's a space you don't live in, and it's a space that's not accessory to that space you live in. These may be some of those other detached structures that don't meet the guidelines for ADUs. But if you want to offer it to live in for someone's residence, that's a residential rental property. Examples of this that we've seen are, maybe a condo that you used to live in, but you've moved out of, you've gotten to expand your space, or a single family home that you rent to tenants pretty regularly and have for a long time, maybe for a year at a time, maybe for a couple years at a time, or maybe month to month. Or this can be your standard multi-unit apartment building. So all of those are considered residential rentals. Next slide, please. So the next question you'll want to ask yourself is, how long do I want to offer my space for each guest or party to stay? So One option is short-term, right? Those are stays that are 29 days or less consecutively. And in order to rent out a space short-term, it has to be your primary residence. That's something you all know very well. So again, here's some examples, right? You may wish to rent out your primary residence to guests for short-term stays, maybe when you go skiing on the weekends, maybe you're traveling for work or for fun if you're lucky enough, or maybe you're on an extended vacation. You get to go somewhere for a month every year to see family, and you want to rent it out during that time. Another option for length of stay is midterm or long-term. Now, this is not; these are not terms that are defined anywhere in the DRMC. So they're just kind of things that we've heard used around, like midterm maybe being 6 weeks or 8 weeks at a time, or long-term being, a 1-year lease or a 2-year lease. At any rate, mid or long-term stays, however you've heard it, however it's been described, those are stays of 30 days or longer. Now, the options here, you can rent either your primary residence, you can rent your ADU, you can rent your residential property, you can rent any of these for guests to stay 30 days or longer. So again, you could rent you could rent your space out long-term or midterm while you travel for work. Maybe you're going on active military duty, maybe you want to study abroad for a semester, right? These are all some ideas of mid or longer term stays. Could also include, right, like I said, a full year term lease. Now I'm going to do a little bit of manifesting because this might be a boat that many of you find yourselves in. Maybe you want flexibility, or maybe you're not sure, right? Maybe you're just not sure how long you want to offer it to guests. Maybe you're starting up your short-term rental and you're not sure if that's going to work out, and you may want to rent long-term eventually. My situation that I'm manifesting is that I'm going to win the lottery, and I'm going to want to rent out my space to maybe a single tenant while I'm going to Italy for an entire year in the year 2025. So, that's a whole year I know I'm going to be gone. I'm not going to be coming back. So I'm going to rent it out just to one person to make it easier for myself. And it won't be my primary residence during that year. However, I want to make sure that in addition to the lottery money I won, I have plenty of money to spend on food and travel. And also I know I'm going to spend all of that when I'm in Italy for the year of 2025. So I might want to rent it out short term once I get back to recoup some of my savings. So I might also want to rent short term. So that's a scenario where, I'm not really sure, but I might want some flexibility, and I'm trying to think about maybe I want to do both. So what does that look like? Next slide, Alex. So we made this cheat sheet, right? So if you fill in the blanks, it'll give you a pretty good answer of which license you may need. So as you both know, or as you all know, both renting out your primary residence or a legitimate ADU, you can do those for stays of 29 days or shorter, or you can do those for 30 days or longer, or you can do both, right? If you only want to do short-term stays, you just need the short-term rental license that you already have or that you're already planning to get. If you want to do 30 days or longer only, then you only need the residential rental property license. But if you currently have a short-term rental license, or you think you want to get a short-term rental license and you also want to be able to rent long-term, you're going to need both licenses. Now, in the past, you could just do this with just a short-term rental license because there was no license to do that longer-term, mid-term, 30-day stays or more. But now that we have that residential rental license, you would just need both as long as you can meet the requirements for both licenses. So for each of the application requirements, for each of the compliance things on the charts, you just have to meet the requirements for both. Now, for when you're thinking about the third type of space, some other space, those are spaces that are not your primary residence. As you know, you can only rent those for stays of 30 days or longer. So previously you didn't need a license to do that. Now you will need a residential rental property license in order to do that in compliance with the law. So if you're a short-term rental host and you've only ever run it as a short-term rental for 29 days or fewer stays, and you just want to continue doing that, none of the residential rental license requirements apply to you. Nothing will change. The only thing that will change is if you are currently doing both or you want to be able to do both. Previously, you didn't need 2 licenses to do that, and beginning on January 1st, you will. So hopefully that cheat sheet makes it a little easier to kind of figure out and plan ahead for the types of licenses that you're going to want to get in 2024 and beyond. Questions?
So yeah, well, I know that was a lot of information, and so if anybody from the committee wants to ask Councilwoman Gilmore questions about the why and the history, or if you have questions about the residential rental program or about how it intersects with the short-term rental program, this would be the time. So Susan, I see you got your hand up.
Yeah, it's a quick question, Erica. I think it may be for you or perhaps Councilwoman Gilmore. Did the city think about residential landlords that own multiple single-family homes? Because there appears to be, an advantage financially to people who own apartment buildings. So even if the apartments are the same size as single-family homes, and I certainly understand the proximity issue is a benefit, right? You're looking at an apartment building in one setting. But if there is a single landlord or multiple landlords that own many single-family homes, the financial differential is somewhat substantial in the licensing part. Not the application fee is, not materially different. But I'm just wondering if that ever came up or was considered, and what the thinking is.
Yeah, thank you. That's a great question. And yes, we did work through those different scenarios because we knew that whatever license fee we applied, it was automatically going to be passed on to the tenant. We needed to make that assumption. And so that was why we made sure that for those with multiple, the multifamily side of it, that we wanted to ensure that we were going to get compliance from them. We knew that there were property owners that most likely did own multiple single family properties within the city and county of Denver, but we weren't trying to, provide necessarily breaks on the license fee to get them to come into compliance. We knew that, renters who were in multifamily were probably not of the socioeconomic level that they would ever be able to qualify and secure a single family property to rent in our city. And so we needed to try to simplify this so that we were able to get compliance. And again, we weren't trying to, unduly burden anybody, but I can see if you did own 8, 9, or 10 single family homes within the city and county of Denver, that you might feel like that. I think the counter to that as well is that we are in a housing crisis, and does it make good sense for a single entity, an LLC, or any entity to own that many properties within the city and county of Denver, especially as we're experiencing gentrification and involuntary displacement in our neighborhoods. We, wanted to do the best that we could to keep renters in their properties and not make it, so much per month, because we knew that property owners were going to pass that on to their tenants.
Got it. That's really helpful. And my second question is about compliance. One of the things excise and licensing has done really well is documenting and presenting compliance data. And I'm wondering, Erica, when you highlighted the dates, namely 1/1 of 23 for multifamily units, and then 1/1 of 24 for single family, where the city is in aggregate compliance for those where the deadline has been established and passed, and then people that are the early bird gets the worm, that are working on all their licensing early, right, for single family homes, now that we have, we're in the last 5 months of the year. So I know it wasn't a chart, but since it's something that's been done for so many years now by excise and licensing, I'm wondering if you're tracking it internally, but not yet presenting it, and kind of at a high level, Erica, where we stand.
So we are tracking as much as we can. We're building dashboards as we go, as opposed to short-term rentals. We sort of build the dashboards. We've collected the data and we've built the dashboards a little bit later, right? We're constantly updating our information. We are tracking the number of licenses. I can say just this week, in the past 7 days, residential rentals have surpassed our highest volume license, our previous highest volume license. It used to be security guards. I think we had about 7,500 security guard licenses. And I think we're approaching 8,000 residential rental licenses. So it's officially our largest volume license and will probably continue in perpetuity as our largest volume license. I think, and we're working on, we have a lot of information on our website about how to apply, inspections, but we don't have any data on there yet. I think our education efforts have focused more on giving people the how-to guides, but that's definitely something we can talk about adding, right, as the public is curious about the number of licenses. You can look up and see if a particular residential rental is licensed. So I'll drop that. We don't have a chat, but I will, it is on, if you go to our residential rental, landing page, there is a frequently asked questions page, I think. Yeah, a frequently asked questions. And the third question is, can I check if a property has a residential rental license? So there's a website that you can go to, or a link that it gives you, and you can filter for any of our business licenses, but especially RRP. So, does that answer your question, or did I just start rambling?
It does. No, it does perfectly. Thank you.
And then I did want to interject in here, and I'm sure, Erica, you're very well aware of it, but as part of this legislation as well, there was a requirement for an annual report back to Denver City Council about the status of this property, and Excise and Licensing had sent that out to City Council the end of June. And what I'm showing on here is that the number of applications plus licenses by property type, specifically to your question, Ms. Bailey, is single family home detached. At the end of June, there were a little bit over 1,600 of those, and then row home, townhome, 2 or more attached. It was close to 2,000, and then apartments were over 3,000, and condos were just a little bit under 900. And so we're getting pretty good uptake. I think getting the word out there to folks, and the total number of rental units with everybody rolled up is close to 140,000 units in the city and county of Denver. And so Boulder's program has been around for over 30 years, and they also are tracking energy efficiencies. And so we didn't try to do everything at once, but as you can imagine, with air conditioning, with our changing climate, where renters might need some sort of cooling system in a unit, etc. We were wanting to at least start to gather some of that data, because if you've got old appliances in a rental as well, it's going to use more energy. And so we didn't make that a requirement to collect, but we wanted to begin to create the system so that we could also track some of those SMART goals around energy efficiency, etc. Later on. Nothing in the hopper right now for that, but a long-term goal if possible.
And now, from what you articulated, Councilwoman Gilmore, now we see the mix and how Erica got to the 8,000. You know what I mean? The composition, if you will. Mm-hmm. So yeah, that's great. I mean, it's great to learn about and to see the progress. So thank you very much.
Thanks.
Great questions. Any other committee members have questions for Councilwoman or myself or Erica about residential rental, short-term rentals, how they intersect? Doesn't look like Erica, you're on mute.
That's okay. In the meantime, I'll address a couple of the questions in the chat. So someone was asking how they can check on their, how they can get an update on their license. So I'm going to answer that question in the chat. There's a guide on our website on how to do that. You can also always email licenses@denvergov.org. Those will be addressed in the order they are received. So that's a pretty straightforward one. Someone else asked about notifying their HOA and what's required for that. So just wanted to let everyone know that the rules require that if your property is being used as a short-term rental, and again, not long-term rental or residential rental, sorry, just for short-term rentals, if the property is included in a homeowners association, the applicant shall inform the homeowners association that the applicant intends to use the property as a short-term rental prior to obtaining a short-term rental license. That's the requirement in rule. I think as part of the application, you just attest to this. I'm not sure if you have to sign something or if you have to check a box. I've not looked at the application in a really long time, but it's just an attestation. If you provide the notice in writing, which we always recommend, you can also upload a PDF of the email. So that would count as notice. And then the third question is asking about a court case out of Austin, Texas, and is asking whether the city will be changing or addressing our ordinance based on that news. The short answer is Austin, Texas is in a different federal circuit than Denver, so any case law out of there is not binding on Denver or Colorado. We're in the 10th Circuit, so interesting, good to follow, but doesn't affect us here in Denver. So those are the questions in the chat or in the Q&A. Does anyone else have any questions?
Councilwoman Sawyer.
Thanks, you guys. I don't have a question. I just wanted to let everyone know that today is my last day on the short-term rental advisory committee. We have a new
emoji.
Sorry.
I said, where's the sad emoji?
Thank you. I have so enjoyed being on this committee. I think we've done some really great work, had some really important conversations, and just really appreciate the engagement of everyone who's a committee member and the public. So I just want to thank all the committee members. I especially want to thank our excise and license staff. And I'm not going anywhere. But I believe Councilwoman Alvidrez will be the new appointee to the short-term rental advisory committee moving forward. So wanted to let everyone know and say thank you.
Thank you, Councilwoman. It has been an absolute pleasure and honor to have you on this committee. We really appreciate the attention you've given to all of the important facets of short-term rental policy. And, you know, we're excited to welcome new faces to the committee, but you will be sorely missed as a great active participant in helping us make this one of our best licensing programs in the city.
Well, thank you so much. And it was my pleasure and my honor. Don't be strangers.
We won't.
Awesome. And yes, and just, you know, ditto to everything Erica said. We really enjoyed having you, Councilwoman, on the committee, and look forward to the new Councilwoman joining the group.
We've got a new question in the chat. We've got someone who's asking, sounds like a general question. What is Excise and Licenses actively doing to support short-term rental hosts? And that's a great question. So I think overall, in a general sense, right, our approach to compliance and enforcement is one that we have always said is geared toward help support our compliant hosts. It is not fair for compliant hosts to have to deal with unlicensed competition. So I think, right, the whole entire goal of this short-term rental advisory committee, these public meetings, the work we've done as a result of the meetings to update our ordinances, most recently in 2020, all of that work goes to support our short-term rental hosts. In addition, you know, we have gotten some great ideas from this committee and continue to receive great ideas. One that I always brag about within the city, and anytime I talk about this committee anywhere else, a great example is the complaint notification system. That was something that has virtually eliminated any of our complaints. As you notice, that's always a super, super low percentage of the calls we get from 311. And that has gone significantly down over the years, in part because a good idea from a host at this group at one of these meetings to say, hey, if there's a property complaint about trash or noise or parking, can we have the host notified so that they can deal with it, right? If I'm out in the mountains skiing and I don't know that someone's complained, how can I fix it? And that was a great collaborative solution that has, like I said, virtually eliminated the property complaints as a concern about short-term rentals. So I think, generally we want to support our compliant hosts. We want to eliminate that unfair competition. We want to ensure that all parties who are profiting from short-term rentals are held responsible equally. And we want to make sure that we remain open to lines of communication about improvements we can make, processes we can improve, and things that we can do to streamline. So any other suggestions on things that we can be doing, we always welcome those, either via licenses at denvergov.org or during the public comment session. Thanks for your question.
And then it looks like Buffy has a question. Buffy, do you still have a question? Not sure if Buffy can hear us.
She might be muted.
We'll come back. And do you see any other questions, Erica, in the chat?
Got one from Tony. Tony, we can chat offline. I'll give you my email, and we can see if we can get your issue sorted. But other than that, I don't see any other questions in the Q&A.
Okay. Well, I know that was a lot of information, and so I'll let you guys digest that a bit. And if you come up with other questions, please feel free to email myself or Erica or our general inbox. I'm happy to answer those questions. If there's no other questions from the committee, are there any comments, concerns, anything like that? If not, we'll move on to public comment. All right, Erica, move on to public comment.
Works for me.
Alrighty. Oh, last thing here, I forgot we have one more slide. That's just to let you know about our next meeting will be November 14th. The agenda is going to be around sustainability and revisiting our disability access work that we had been working on. Possibly we'll have some data from that question around short-term rental accessibility features. So we'll revisit that and see what other directions we might be able to go with promoting disability access in the short-term rental market, and then revisiting sustainability and see if what other work we can do there. So for the committee, the request is, if you have ideas for speakers, if you have data that you want us to look at, if you have questions that you want us to look into related to either sustainability or disability access, please let us know, because that helps us build the presentation for you all. And then Susan, I see you have your hand up.
Yeah, I just had a quick question. Erica, you probably noticed Dana is out of the country. She's not here. But she asked when we had a host meetup last week about the status of in-person meetings, since so many meetings in the city can be done either way, in person and Zoom capability. So I wondered if that is something we're thinking about for STRAC, because we seem to continue to have a Zoom only model.
That's a great question. Yeah, we were just plodding along with virtual only because it's been so successful. And the nice thing is we can post the video, which I think are more accessible than minutes that we used to take. But that said, we're open to feedback on that. Alex, maybe we can put together a survey to see what we want to do in 2024, right? Maybe we can do some polling of both STRAC members and audience members. Maybe we can send it out via the bulletin and see if people prefer in-person, virtual, or hybrid check-ins, and maybe a couple of other questions, and just kind of get a feel for what folks are wanting and what folks enjoy and what they find most helpful. So definitely open to hybrid or in-person if that's what a lot of people are wanting and craving. We'll figure out the tech side of it after we hear what people want.
Yep, happy to work with our communications associate Chuck Hickey, and we'll put out a survey and see what folks say.
Yeah, and the other thing, Erica, that came up in that same meeting was with some of the changing of the guard in terms of city council and the mayoral team. Erica invited a lot of us to participate and listen to some kind of roundtable discussions, which was, I think, great, Erica, like a month or so ago. And a lot of people did try to join, but there have been some questions asking about, at what level has the new team been briefed on short-term and the residential rental model, those kinds of things. So perhaps that's something we could just tee up at the November 14th meeting. But those were the two topics that came up that I'm representing Dana on.
Okay. And I can let you know, I believe the Vibrant Denver, which is the transition team, so that's kind of the committees for the mayor, at least. I won't speak for any of the new council folks, but the mayor's transition committee held those, department by department committees. And I believe they published the reports from those somewhere, but we can definitely include that when we send around the information about the next meeting. We have briefed the new administration just generally on what excise and licenses does, and some general stats about our agency, some of our major programs. So that covers everything from short-term rentals, residential rentals, marijuana, liquor, monitoring state psilocybin regulation. So kind of the gamut of all the fun things that you can do. But I'm sure we'll be in touch more. So I'll put that on the wish list for the agenda for next time.
Great, thank you.
Thank you, Susan. Appreciate the input and questions. Any final thoughts from the committee before we jump over to public comment? Okay. All right. And feel free if something comes up to jump in, but we'll now give some time for folks from the public. So again, if you do have, generally, I just want to let the public know we don't answer questions. So if you want to pose a question, a member from the committee may choose to answer that. We might just take that as input. And if it's specifically about like your application or some issue that you have, we have those conversations offline. Again, feel free to email us directly and we'll work with you to provide that customer service. But if you have just kind of general comments about our program or things that you want the committee to consider, this would be the time. And so if any members of the public want to put their hand up and speak, we'd have 2 minutes to speak. If you're unable to raise your hand, let me just check my email here. Does not look like I've received any emails. And so does not look like we're going to have public comment today.
And Alex, Buffy was trying to speak. She sent me a text that she could hear us, but we couldn't hear her for her to speak. So I don't know if she
send you the question as well, or
maybe, I don't know if we can type into this Q&A as panelists.
if she's Buffy, if you can hear us, if you could email me the question, that would probably be the best way to do that. If you have comments or questions, is anybody else from the committee having any kind of those issues? Raise your hand or make a note somewhere. I think I can hear Buffy type, or is that Eric?
Oh, sorry, that's me.
All right, well, we'll wait to see. To see if Buffy's able to email in her comments or questions. But hopefully nobody else is having those issues. I don't see anybody else that's.
In the meantime, we got another question from an attendee asking if a short-term rental property is rented to an individual for 30 days or more, they must execute a lease and provide the city resources to that guest. So if you are a current short-term rental licensee and you want to rent to guests for stays of 30 days or more, previously you did not need an additional license to do that. But if you're a single family home starting in January 1st, 2024, you will need that additional license to do those 30 days or longer stays, and you will have to comply with all the requirements of that residential rental license to get the license. So there's several, but the key pieces are you're going to have to get that inspection. You're going to have to comply with the requirements about the documents that you have to give to tenants that are in that section of the code. So I would definitely familiarize yourself with that residential rental application requirements website to make sure that you've got everything that you need. I'll drop that in the chat, and I'll see if I can make it so that everyone can see the answer.
Thank you, Eric. I appreciate that.
And Alex, Buffy is looking for the email to send her question.
Sure. So she can send it to it's Alex, ALEX .vidal, VIDAL @denvergov.org. And oh, it's right. Oh, it's on the presentation there. If the presentation's still up. And I don't know if she's able to chat with you and send you the information. I don't know if that might be faster, but we greatly appreciate everyone participating and listening to the information. Appreciate the questions and ideas for future meetings and things that areas we might explore. And just give Buffy another minute to see if she can get. Oh, here we go. Yeah, I got it. Okay, so Buffy says, not letting me read it because I'm an unknown source, and so it's getting caught up in my spam filter somehow. All right, if I just have 30 seconds here to see if I can resolve this issue and get to Buffy's email. Okay, now it looks like I'm not going to be able to access the email that Buffy sent. It just looks like it's a copy of an email I sent earlier. Erica, how do you think we should proceed here? Oh, you're on mute.
I don't know. Buffy, if you try forwarding it to me. And if we can't get it answered live, we'll at least follow up via email to the committee members.
Yeah, we have about 30 seconds more, but that might end up being the best solution is to email the answer to her question or email her comments if they're comments to the rest of the committee so that the committee has the benefit of those. Oh, okay, here he goes. I was wondering about protections for landlords. So I'm not quite sure what if you're meaning landlords for long-term rentals, and protections there, and maybe in terms of balancing the needs of renters with the needs of the landlords. I don't know if Councilwoman Gilmore has much to say on that, or if Buffy wants to clarify a little bit more, but assuming that the question's about sort of supporting or advocating for landlords with, being a two-sided kind of relationship with landlords and tenants. Councilwoman Gilmore, if you want to jump in.
Sure, I'm happy to answer that. When you talk about developing communication back and forth with a lot of property owners, and some folks might live out of state, et cetera, et cetera. We knew that the residential rental license would also enable us as the city to develop a very robust listserv list of those property owners, landlords, et cetera, that we could do a better job as a city communicating with. But prior to the rental license, we didn't have any of that information. And so it would have been very hit or miss to communicate with everybody. And so now with all of those individuals that we now who have complied with the residential rental license, we now have all their information. And so that's really appreciate you asking this question, because I think of protection for property owners and landlords around understanding what resources are out there for their tenants. And so one of the programs that's a really popular program in the city and county of Denver is the temporary rent and utilities assistance program. Well, we wouldn't expect property owners or landlords to know about that program. A lot of renters knew that we offered it, but now through having everybody's contact information, we can more reliably send out updates, new information, and especially develop that relationship that is mutually beneficial in sharing information and hearing ideas and concerns also from property owners and landlords on what they're seeing out there. If there's a gap in services or supports, we now have that direct line of communication back and forth. And so I really think that that's one of those ways that we are, through better contact information and sharing of information, we're protecting both landlords and folks who rent in the city.
Thank you, Councilwoman Gilmore. Appreciate you jumping in there to answer that question. I'm just going to follow up here. I'm not sure if we'll be able to answer this here, but the question is, I was wondering about what happens if renters overstay their lease, so evictions. I'm not sure if anybody here is particularly specifically qualified to answer that. In general, there's an eviction process that goes through the court system. I'm not sure about if there's, I think the eviction moratorium, if Colorado had one, has expired. I see Councilwoman Gilmore shaking her head there. So assuming that has expired and it's back to the system that was in place before the pandemic. And so it would be a court process to have someone physically removed from a property. Well, seeing that there's no more questions or comments, I'll go ahead and close the meeting out. Just want to make a note here that when we publish the video online, probably cut out some of those gaps there where we're having technology issues. And so I just want to make a note here for everybody that watches the video later that nothing substantive happened during those portions. We were just having some technology issues. And I don't know if anybody wants to say anything else, but otherwise, we'll close the meeting out here, and we'll meet up back in November. And in the meantime, email us with questions, with input. And Erica has got a comment.
Sure. Just want to point everybody to there is on our website, there's the residential rental property landing page. It has information about how to apply new, information for property owners and managers. There's also tenant and landlord resources and information. And there's a ton of resources. There's some PDFs. It has information about evictions. It has a lot of information about each of the safety requirements. Today's a primer. If you have more specific questions, email us at licenses@denvergov.org. We'll route that question to the appropriate person to answer and provide more information, whether it's someone in the councilwoman's office, whether it's someone in host, maybe it's a licensing issue that we can answer, but definitely tool around on that website, because there are a lot of good resources, including, if you are looking to obtain a residential rental property license, what is required of you as a landlord under that tenant rights and resources disclosure law that passed a few years ago.
Thank you so much for that, Erica. Appreciate everyone's comments, and we'll let y'all go and see you next time. Have a good night, everyone.
Bye, everybody.